Welcome to the Naked Truth 2.0 podcast, where we bring you the stories and topics that you won't hear in the mainstream, sharing incredible journeys of great people who are overcoming the odds to achieving great things and their purpose in this timeline. We're here in London, UK. I want to say thank you to our host station, Flex FM Media Group, out there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and an even bigger thank you to the person who started me on this journey, the great man himself, TC Flex. I stand aligned with your mission to bring the naked truth.
I did grow up feeling very lonely and isolated. There was lots of things that felt like I was being singled out. Inside the house, if they weren't very nice, they still had to be your family.
Yes, there's definitely something that draws you to them.
I think we were about 4 or 5. The only memories I really have of that place is living in fear.
There was just something missing.
From the late 1950s until the mid-90s, thousands of West African children were unofficially fostered in Britain by white families in a practice known as farming. As well as the disconnect from their cultural identity, they suffered racism, physical and emotional abuse, and many suffered sexual abuse. In the studio today, I'll be speaking to Abi Osho, who grew up in this system and is now an author and a very powerful healer. I'm also joined remotely by Professor Femi Bogle-Asabgai from Connecticut, USA. And Professor Femi is a social scientist and an educator of social philosophy and ethics. Welcome to you both. Greetings. Welcome, Abi. It's really great to have you here. And it's great to have you on screen, Femi. Now, if I could start with you, Abi. I first learned about the practice of farming back in the summer when I was invited to the screening of White Nanny Black Child at the BFI by a friend of mine, a very good friend who grew up in this system herself. And she was featured in the documentary along with her sister. And they were both farmed from very young. I hate saying the term, but it's what it was called. From very, very young and till they were, I think, maybe 10 or 11 perhaps. This is an incredible story. For you, as a Nigerian child who was brought up in this system, how did this impact your life?
For me, I think I was fostered from the age of 5 weeks old. So I didn't know any different. And growing up in East Sussex as I did, it was a time, as you mentioned, of racism. And I think what compounded that was we were growing up, or I was growing up, in a white working class family that didn't have any knowledge or any background about, black African children. Why would they? So it was very much, I remember one of my very first memories. I was about 4 years old and we got on the bus, the green and white bus. And I remember as I stood up, I was with my foster mum, and this elderly white man, as I stood up, he was going to sit down and he got a cloth and he wiped the seat. And I looked up at my foster mum and she just said, don't worry, there's crumbs on the seat. But this wasn't the first time that this happened. This happened a number of times. And what I recall was there was a conversation, again, between an elderly white couple, really just saying that, make sure, like, if you're going to sit down anywhere where anyone coloured, because that was sometimes the term used then, was sitting, that you've got to wipe the seat because they're dirty. And so in order for us to sit down, we need to make sure that the seats are clean. And so hearing this as a really young child, in my formative years, I believed that to be true. So I would go home and without my mum, my foster mum, kind of knowing, I would like really scrub to see like if I could get the dirt off of my skin. And clearly it was my skin, so it wouldn't come off. And so there was always this feeling of less than of not really belonging, of wanting to be white, because if I blended in, then I wouldn't have the stigma, I wouldn't feel embarrassed, I wouldn't always feel that I was being looked at like I was different, because I was different. But I didn't really understand why that was, I guess, at such a young age. And I always wanted to just blend in with everybody else. Those were kind of my very early memories up until starting school.
And did you have other siblings that were in this system with you, or was it just you?
No,
from your family.
Yeah, so there were other children that, I mean, I call it private fostering because that's how we know the terminology. That's what I grew with. So my biological brother and I were privately fostered. And then there was always probably around, I would say 3 or 4 other Nigerian foster children that some would stay, I don't know, 6 months, some a year, some 2 years. So there was always, I guess, like a turnover in terms of other, what we would call like foster brothers and sisters then.
During that time, so from 5 weeks old, I mean, that's young. That's a baby still.
Yeah.
Not even, you're still going through the lactose
Yeah.
period of
Absolutely.
your, manifestation into the earth.
Yeah.
How did that affect? Did you know who your biological parents were? Did they visit you? How did you get to connect with your biological family, your mum and your dad?
Yeah, and so CJ, my memory of my mum and my dad, I don't remember them visiting me. Mm-hmm. Although, when I was much older, my mother said that she did, but I don't have any memory of that. The only memory that I do have is my biological mother came with her, let me put it a little bit into context. So my mother and father split up, separated. I don't exactly know what age we were, but I was like 5 or 6. Mm-hmm. I'm just working out the numbers roughly. And then around 7, my biological mother came to visit. I remember walking on the wall outside of our house, and she brought me this pink and gold faced watch with a pink strap. And she told me that she was going to be moving to Canada with her new partner. And so she'll be moving away, and it was kind of like a goodbye. But because I hadn't really seen my biological mum and I didn't really know who she was, it didn't really bother me at that time. I just thought, wow, this is a really lovely watch. Thank you very much. And
Probably
so
a Timex watch. Do you remember those?
I do remember those,
Yeah.
And so I was just really appreciative of the gift. It didn't really hit me that, because I never really saw her as my mum, because I was always with my white foster mum. So it didn't emotionally, it kind of, it didn't have any effect on me at that age.
So let me talk a little bit about the documentary Where I Found You.
Yes.
And started to, understand this topic. And I remember at the end of the documentary, everyone in the audience at the BFI stood up and they were clapping.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I kind of looked around me and I thought, okay, people clapping as if they feel that we've achieved something here. Because I've got lots of unanswered questions. That's what I thought to myself. I have a lot of unanswered questions. I'm not satisfied with what I've seen. I'm glad this has been brought to my attention. I was tearful and I looked around me and everyone in the audience, and it was a mixed audience, but predominantly I would say West African relatives and friends of individuals that were involved in this this thing, I'm going to say. Some of the stories, because I'm going to get onto your story and your book in a minute, but some of the stories were shocking.
Yeah.
How did you become the person that you are today, considering the trauma in your upbringing and in identifying, with the cast, that everyone in that circle that was featured in that documentary suffered their own abuse? Whether it be they had loving parents, but they had to go through racism because they didn't fit in with the rest of the family or the schools they went to, or one particular lady that was sold to a paedophile ring. Yeah. And you could see, when I talk about it, I still shake. How did you get into a position where you could heal yourself so you can then go on to heal others? When did that start coming through this journey?
Oh, I think that my healing journey probably started around 20 years ago, when I first started asking more questions.
So you're an adult, effectively.
I was an adult.
Yeah.
Because up until that time, and it wasn't until 10 years ago that I really started telling people that I'd even been fostered, because I felt embarrassed and guilty and ashamed.
Well, the same thing with my friend, I won't mention her name, who was featured in the documentary. She mentioned to me, and she's an incredible, successful businesswoman now.
Absolutely.
But she mentioned to me about not growing up in London. And she lived outside of London. And when I think about it, she does have a bit of an accent, but she never told me to the extent of her upbringing. I learned at the screening.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do remember in the 70s, seeing a lot of coming from the Caribbean,
Yeah.
African children with very short hair,
Yes.
dry skin,
Yep,
holding on to
absolutely.
prams
Yeah.
with white women
Yeah.
pushing the prams.
Yeah.
And we never understood what that was.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you was so
We were
even where
witnessing-
you were living, you were
Yeah,
witnessing
in East London, yeah.
the private fostering phenomena.
Yeah.
But not obviously recognising or
Understanding this.
realising
No.
what it was.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, when I started to ask myself questions like, who am I? And I had, I think, made a subconscious decision to be very disconnected from myself. You know, I was this person, but I didn't quite know who I was. And so I was always, I think, looking for people to connect with and almost absorb into those people, because then I didn't have to face me. I didn't have to do the work. I didn't have to unpick all the stuff that I'd hidden away, locked away, that I thought back then would never come to surface, because I just didn't think I could manage or cope with what was going to come. And I think as the years went on, and I spoke to more and more people that were... I had a counsellor much later on, but before that I was very interested in like self-development. I was always one to like go to the conferences and I would be like, oh my gosh, I want to be that person. I want to be more like that person speaking or who I'm speaking to. And then suddenly it was like a lockdown, because I was like, I'm not that person. I'm less than. And so the memories, the default memories from childhood of being not enough, of no self-acceptance, of this who am I identity would always kick in, to the point where, you know, I had a wonderful job, and, you know, I was kind of heading up a training company. I was sat on the board. I had 160 staff. I was doing really well on the outside.
But falling apart on the
falling
inside.
apart on the inside. And I think what happened was, when I had my daughter, who's now 24, I had no choice but to deal with the emotions, because suddenly it was like, I've had my daughter, where is my mother? And my partner's mother, my partner is Nigerian, born and bred in the UK. And that was interesting, because I never thought I'd go out with a Nigerian guy, because I always had this, I guess, thought process.
Were you dating white men?
Never.
Never?
No. So it was very interesting for me. And I think, and I say that never, not because when I was like 13, 14, 15, I didn't want to, because that's all I saw around me.
you, yeah.
But clearly they were like, there's no way I'm dating you. You're black. You know, you're black, you're dirty, you know what I mean? You're
That
unclean.
psychological imbalance then coming through.
Yeah.
So that's what you were thinking about black men, perhaps?
No,
Or no, they were saying...
No, the white men were
well,
saying to me, the
projecting that
white
onto
young
you, I
guys,
see.
at 13,
yeah.
14, 15,
Yeah.
that all of my white friends were dating, and I would think, oh, you seem really nice. No way, you're black, you're a wog, do you know what I mean? So it was like, it was shut down before it could even become a reality.
Yeah.
So therefore, I guess in my mind back then, it was like, okay, I'm not attractive to anybody, because these are the only people I see around me. And even, I guess, then in Hastings, what I would also see and find, and he says, was a lot of the black guys then would only date white women.
Yeah.
So they were definitely not interested. You know, so there was this whole kind of paradigm of, this is what you have to look like, which would be white. to have a partner, to have a boyfriend, to have somebody that was interested in you. And so I think for me, it was really interesting because I had this conflict of, I guess, not really wanting to date white guys, but not having anyone else, and not feeling black enough to probably date anybody black. But
You
having
were just
this
caught in this non-world of who am I?
constantly,
non-identity.
of this
Rejected one side, but not quite sure where you fit
in the
on the
other.
other. Yeah.
And so I think there was this cycle of, in the who am I, I'm not black enough to be accepted. And I think, part of that was when I was in Hastings, when I was in East Sussex, and the only black children that I grew up around, and this was in my teenage years, were children from the Caribbean that were in children's homes, because certain councils at that time owned children's homes, and they would ship them out of London, them out, because they think, oh, London, no, too many challenges, too much going on, too much crime. Let's take them to the country, get them rehabilitated. Well, they just rang rings around. Nobody was ready for them.
When I was in school, I remember, I'd say the majority of the black guys in our school, and I think it always depending on the type of music they listen to, and I'm going to bring in Professor Femi in a minute,
Yes.
who's been waiting patiently on the screen, but they would say that black women were ugly.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up saying, oh my God, maybe I'm never going to get married because, they were older than me, but they didn't find us attractive, interestingly.
Yeah.
Professor Femi, thank you for your patience. You are an expat living in the States. So you're originally from the UK and you've been in the States, I'd say I've known you for 25 years. West Africa is a region of up to 16 countries. Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, and I say Liberia, I've added them in for a reason, but to name a few. What do you think was happening in the minds of those West African immigrants that felt, and I know you've done some research on this, but I just want to get from Femi's perspective, because you've got such an overview of what was happening in the UK politically at the time. What was happening in the minds, do you think, of these young people? Because I understand your parents were very young.
Absolutely.
That would allow you to give up your child at 5 weeks old to a culture that was totally diametrically opposed to your own. Coming from Windrush families, we were left with our grandparents. We were left in our families when our parents had to make that transition. What is the cultural, psychological dynamic that you think was at play here?
Well, tall order to good afternoon to your audience, to understand what was in the minds of these particular parents. Context is really critical here. When I say context, I mean the context of empire, the context of Britishness, the context of mother country, the context of, while not explicitly said, but we and our family members were trained into being British, and all of the Britishness of Black Britons, if you will. So because Britain left its offsprings and the local Black population in charge when it was forced to leave the continent of Africa, India, the Caribbean, and elsewhere that it had colonized, it left in the minds of those people the idea that if you're going to be anything and anyone and have any success, your best bet is to be as British as possible. And so I can only believe that those persons believed that by taking their young children to England specifically, and fostering them out. And I'm sure there was some kind of financial incentive somewhere there fostering them out, that those children would get the best of British education and the love of white people, because at source, people of African ancestry do not think in terms of color stratification, unless we're thinking about the fact that people of European origin are at the top of that color ladder, if you will. And so therefore, to foster out the children was to do something that would be good for them ultimately. The belief is what I think occurred. Much like in the Caribbean parents believed that to go to the mother country and to get your education in the mother country was certainly superior to staying in the Caribbean and getting a Caribbean stepchild type education of Britain, rather than being there at the source.
And I understand you said that from a African perspective, we don't see that colour stratification. But surely colonialism, and for West Africa and throughout Africa, and for us as Caribbean people, has somewhat, or has a role to play in the impact on our minds and how we see ourselves in relation to that hierarchy, surely. Did you find this when you started speaking to your parents, when you started to maybe understand their thinking? A lot of it was because they were new, I suppose, and they wanted better for themselves. But did you feel that perhaps their mind with religion, the way, who's at the top of the Christian religion, who's the, the figurehead at the top of the Christian religion, do you think that impacted the mindset somewhat?
Yeah, probably did, in terms of, going to church every Sunday in Nigeria or wherever you were in Africa, and seeing the white Jesus and having that throughout all of your house. But what I also think impacted was that, I guess going back to Professor Femi's point about the colorism, was I think that my parents, they would have seen civil servants, they would have seen this hierarchy of whiteness that was in power in their country before they gained back what, before they were decolonized, so to speak. Yeah. And so therefore, because they had no understanding, how would they, of the class system in the UK, working class, middle class, upper, higher, they wouldn't have had any of that understanding. So they came thinking that they were bringing their children to be with these middle class, hierarchical white people that they had seen in Nigeria that worked in local and higher government.
And in effect, it was what they were encountering, and the system they were bringing the children into here were totally different.
It was totally different.
Yeah.
Working class, lower class system.
Absolutely.
Completely had nothing to do with that.
And I think the fact that these homes were unregulated, they didn't have license to childmind or to look after children, speaks volumes as to the standards. Yeah. You mentioned when we spoke in sort of, our interview to do this research about Nursery World, the magazine Nursery World, Nursery World being almost like the platform where you would go to find, these families.
Yeah. Yeah.
So surely they must take some responsibility with advertising for these families. So who paid for the ad? Was it the families? How did that transaction work?
No, the families didn't actually pay for the ads. So there was, I guess, like a government office that was based in Trafalgar Square. It was like the colonial office, and they would have had an exit plan for when they were leaving Africa, and at that time, and it continues today, all the resources would be taken from Africa, from Nigeria. So, the gold, all of these incredible resources were taken. So the plan, I believe, through my research, and this is my research, was that the long-term plan is if we allow the men, first and foremost, to come and study in the UK, they will gain an education, they will be indoctrinated into our education system, and they will gain their education. So therefore, when we finally leave the country, we have people that will have the same thought process, the same mindset as we had when we were there. And therefore, we can work with them in order to continue to keep the resources. It was never about our education, in my opinion.
There was no ulterior motive.
There was always a plan.
The resource.
It was always about the resources. So in order for that to kind of take place, they, first and foremost, I actually don't think that there was a plan to have children or wives there. It was only the men that were coming.
Take away the head.
Take away the head, absolutely. However, part of the experience of the men was that they were coming from this compound community where family was family. Like, you know, and your family would never have existed of 2 children, a husband and a wife. It would have been your extended family. So all of us, aunties, uncles, grandparents, brothers, sisters, you know, cousins would have all lived together to this cold country where they were unwanted, they were unwelcome. You know, it was the days, wasn't it? No coloureds, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. In these single rooms where they would be going off to study but coming home to nobody, and this very cold country. And so the mental health issues started to be a huge issue. They wouldn't have even called it mental health back then,
No.
you know. But also, you know, there were many men that committed suicide.
My daughter is studying media, and she's currently in Denmark at one of the media colleges over there. And she had to come back here for 3 weeks with her, with other students, to film a documentary around religion. And they were curious to find out why religion and the 3 major religions of the world have been the kind of the basis of wars and strife and trouble. And she went to a Christian church, and I asked her how and that was one assignment. She went to a mosque, and she went to a Hindu temple, a mosque, a synagogue, and a Christian church. And she said, I was disgusted. And I said, well, why? And she said, because I don't understand why black people are so gullible and so easy to subdue. And I'm going to ask you the question, what do you think could be happening in the minds of people who have come from such a powerful and rich history of sovereignty? A history where, you know, and I'm going to talk about your book, where we named our children for purpose. It wasn't just willy-nilly. The naming process was very important to the community, to the family. The children were named before they were even born for purpose. How did we get over thousands of years to the point where anyone can just come in and rule?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to really make the point that when you are the original people, and we are that, you know, that goes without saying. It's now a fact, and I think it's accepted that African people are the original people on the planet. You don't then construct systems that allow you to stratify groups of people based on their color, and then go into creating ideas and concepts around this notion of inferior, superior. That whole idea about people being inferior and superior and less than comes out of the color code stratification out, from the Göttingen University some time back, where Europeans needed, following their circumvention of the planet, to be able to hoard the resources from Africa and Asia. And they were able to set up systems that spread the word and inculcated people into the belief that they were less than, right? And so when you've come through a system that tells you you're less than, and you yourself don't have a counter system to say, no, we're not less than anybody, then what happens is you don't believe, for the most part, that there's an actual group of people who will construct a system for the sole purpose of taking your resources, indoctrinating you to serve their purpose. We see all of the manifestation of that today across the globe in terms of what England and the British and the French and the Spaniards and the Portuguese and the Dutch have done to the planet following their circumvention of that. What we must do as people of African ancestry is learn and understand that, because this conversation brings me to the question of culture and its significance to identity.
Okay.
Its significance to identity. So yes, we're talking about our children who were given over to these British nannies, primarily working class. But in the final analysis, if we do a deep dive into African people, including those of us from the Windrush generation, we will find that some of what Abby's talking about also applies, right? As it relates to this business of healing. Who am I? What is my background? Why are my people appearing to be gullible and appearing to be the people who are suppressed and oppressed and we're not doing anything about it, and so on and so forth. So this is a deep and extensive conversation that could obviously extend, right? But I'm going to be quiet and have you ask your next question.
No other race of people have been subjugated by their invaders in the way that the Black nation have been. And I just want to say here that I'm not ignoring the gruesome wars and atrocities that are taking place on the planet right now. I think that's another story for another time. By way of the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, the impact on the diaspora and the motherland is immense. But I can't help thinking that there's something spiritual here going on. These things don't just happen by chance. And if I could just come back to you, Abby, you've now written a book called Becoming Visible.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to encourage the audience to please buy this book, and we'll send a link at the end of the podcast to direct you into how you can do so and to give you more information about Abby's work. Now, I found the book very difficult to read.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to talk about the sexual abuse that you encountered
Yes.
in the foster home by the oldest son of your foster mother.
Yeah, the youngest son.
It was the youngest son, sorry.
Son, yeah.
I knew that. As a child. And I had to put the book down many times to kind of digest that, how you described the abuse, how it made you feel. Also the racial abuse and the way, people viewed you as a young child trying to make your way through this. But you all, your foster mother doing her best.
Absolutely.
Tried to protect you, but nevertheless, the mindsets existed. And I thought to myself, how did you manage? Because when you write it, I wanted to ring you at one point because I was getting a bit angry. So, why isn't there no emotion in this? Look what's happened to you. Yeah. How did you manage to sit here as glamorous as you are? You're married. You have 2 children.
Yeah.
I feel myself shaking right now. And to hold no prisoners from the level of abuse that you encountered throughout your formative years, and to adulthood. How did you manage to get to that point of healing?
I think for me, when I started to recognize that I wasn't to blame, and as I said, when I started to kind of ask myself questions about who was I think for me it was very spiritual. You will read in the book, I got myself into some real crazy situations when I was young because I was I think the sexual abuse, the racial abuse, all of that, I was angry. And, my foster mum had died, my father had died. So there was so many things going on. But I felt that even though my father had died, my father had passed, I never knew my grandfather. In Nigeria, I felt that ancestrally I was connected to them. They were helping me. There's a certain time in the book when I decided to come back to Hastings. Things had got really heavy in London. I'd run away to London. I was 14. I'd left school, and it got crazy. I met some crazy people, and I knew it was time to go. It was time to get out. I couldn't live with this anymore. But I had to question. When I did get out, when I did come back, I was living with an amazing friend of mine at the time, and she was from Hastings. She was a white girl. She was 2 years older than me, but she got involved in heroin and really hard drugs. And so by the time I came back, I went to visit her. I found all of this out, and I was like, how was it that my timing? How did I know to come back at that time? And I knew in myself that it wasn't me. There was something else. But I also, at that age, I was 15 by then, I was almost pushing this thing away. I didn't know what it was. What is it that's going on in me that's kind of telling me to do certain things, that's a voice in my head saying do this and do that? I didn't understand it. But there was also something, I think, innate in me that knew to listen to the voices, to listen and just allow that intuitive voice to guide me. And for me, I believe that they were and are my ancestors. And so that spiritual connection to the whole healing, I believe they helped me open up the doors and the way to forgive, to show compassion. And that had to be very key in terms of my abusers. And to know that there is a purpose for me. And that purpose, if I follow it, if I strip away from all of the material and all the rubbish I've been filling myself up with to feel that there's something going on, is for me to continue the healing. And so after some time, some years, it's like I entered into this healing journey for myself, first and foremost, and even writing the book. It took me a while to write that book because there was emotions that I hadn't processed properly. I thought I had. I told myself I had, CJ. But when it came to writing, particularly about the sexual abuse, incidents on the bus, all of that stuff
It was buried deep down. It started to erupt.
It's kind of like an eruption of a volcano.
Yeah.
So I had to process all of that as I was writing the book. So sometimes I had to, because this is my second book.
Oh.
My first book, because it was about holistic healing and health, done.
But when it had to do with self.
But when it had to do with self, oh my days, a whole different story. I had to take away the parameters, which I was like, right, I'm going to write this book about myself. It's going to take me 6 months. No. I had to do it from a place of heart. And I had to make the decision writing this book. And I spoke to my children, I spoke to my husband about this as well, that I am going to be really honest in this book. And the reason why it took me so long to write it is because I was going to tell everything. And in order for me to do that, one, I knew I had to be very, very clear and intentional about my own healing journey. And know even when I was in those places where I was crumbling and I was crying and I thought, oh my God, I thought I dealt with this. And I hadn't. I still I had to come back from that. I had to do the work to continue the next chapter.
Ah, okay.
And
so your healing was systematic.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you had to find those pinch points like, oh my God, I didn't know that reaction would bring, or that trigger would bring this reaction
up.
Yeah.
But in that trigger bringing that reaction up, that's why it's so raw in many places. Because I was writing it from that place.
From that place of feeling it.
Releasing the emotion, but speaking into it so that I felt I was healing through it too. If that makes sense.
Absolutely does. This is very powerful, Professor Femi. And I remember when I was in the audience at the first screening and everybody was clapping and I suddenly thought, hold on a second. How does the healing circles and the healing and the emotional crying and the love that was shared in that house, with the subjects of the documentary who'd been through the same experiences as you.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about the diaspora and where we find ourselves constantly ruminating about our past, about whose fault it was, and from my understanding now, almost we find ourselves in a spiritual construct that is self-perpetuating, and we are now manifesting the situation. And is healing what we need to be doing as a diaspora. And I drew the connections between what I saw from that documentary, the work that you did with the group, and I drew a parallel to the self-destruction in the youth in the UK, knife crime. And I know there are other elements involved here, but this inability to rise up. And when I say rise up, and I don't want Black people to think that this is about a war. No, this is about spiritual uprising in love, because we have something to give to the world. In fact, we've always had something to give to the world, because music, culture, swag, mathematics, we know the history. We could go on forever. We know where civilization started. So is this a question of healing for us?
Absolutely. And we're in that time right now. We are in that time. And those who know, let me say they know. And when you come into contact with those of us in the diaspora who are in that space, that spiritual space, that space of connecting with a source that is, in some instances, unexplainable and inexplainable, we know and we understand that we have to do that Sankofa work. We have to go back. We have to go to the source. And so I'm not surprised, CJ, for example, why you're having the conversation with Abi. I don't think it's a conversation really about just merely white nannies and Black children. This is a conversation about redemption. This is a conversation about finding self. This is a conversation about finding our stability. It's a conversation about finding our confidence, about finding our voice, about finding our cultural equilibrium and being unapologetic about that. And so, because I believe that we're in this healing space, I think it is also critical that those of us who are on that journey need to do exactly what Abi did with respect to the honesty and the candid nature of her story, her writing, because you have to literally bear the entire house, if you will. Cleanse, it's a cleansing. It's a cleansing process.
It's the forgiveness that allows you to do that. It's the forgiveness that allows you to cleanse. That's the first.
Forgiveness.
Yeah.
Forgiveness, because that forgiveness is indeed for self, first and foremost.
Yeah.
First and foremost, because for so long there's blame to self, and when you do that, you cannot see the wood, the trees, or the woods for the trees, or what have
you. For the trees.
You cannot see through the fog, and part and parcel of the madness that we see in our communities across the planet, to include the continent. We understand that madness is not us. That's not who we are. We are acting out in a way that is self-destructive, because we have been, over many, many centuries, been inculcated and subjugated with the belief that, one, we have no God. Our spiritual entity doesn't exist. And so
he does. His name is Jesus.
Yes, we have been forced to
embrace that construct. Yes, a doctrine.
That construct as it has been reconstructed.
And also to say this, Professor Femi, to also look for the savior outside of self. And you've demonstrated with your own work that you had to address self, everything that's within.
Absolutely.
It is all about that.
Yeah, and
addressing self.
Absolutely, and that goes against looking for the outside healer and the outside savior goes against our original spiritual hierarchy and how
Absolutely.
we were set up in our original land. We always knew that there were deities that sat on the outside, but we knew that man and the power were inextricably linked.
Absolutely. That's our primordial power.
Our primordial power. Because we're spirit having a physical reality in this experience.
As we like to say, in order to really blow the roof off, we say we're gods having a human experience. Why do we say gods? Because we need to get our people to a place where they understand that there is an ethic associated with that. When you understand that you're striving to be godlike, what you understand is that you must do that which is right every time. Regardless of how hard that is, regardless of how difficult that is. So it is a discipline in learning and coming to the realization that your spiritual healing requires a level of honesty and godlike behavior that is second to none. It's a huge challenge, but there are many of us who are recognizing that that is in fact the truth, and that we ought to go on that path of telling the truth.
Thank you for ending with the point about truth.
Thank you.
Because truth, in effect, is healing. You know, it's a vibration. A lie is a vibration, and a truth is a vibration. And the truth, that vibrational truth, is more in line with the way we are made up.
Absolutely.
You know, Abi, tell us about your healing circles that I witnessed on screen in the documentary.
The healing circles, really, I mean, I've done a lot of circle work over the last few years. And, you know, I'm a true believer in the power of holding sacred circles. And within that, when people feel safe and protected, that they can honestly share their truth, as Professor Fenn was saying, they can share their truth from a place of heart, not a place of preconceived, this is what I'm going to talk about because other people are around me and I don't really want them to know who I am. So my live retreats in the UK and in Africa, but also online, the Healing Heart Circles came from wanting, you know, there's one of me and there's some other incredible sisters that are doing some circle work, but I want this healing circle work to be done globally and not just from a therapist perspective. I want, you know, if you work in a retailer's down the road, but you know that you are willing and you want to hold sacred circle for a group of people, and you know that that's going to help, I want you to have the tools to do it. So I've created, it's called Healing Heart Circles, and it's a facilitation training with 5 pillars so that people, I mean, I want to work with, originally because I work with women at the moment, so all the work I've done over the years has been with women, but Black and brown men and women I want them to embrace this circle work because it's so powerful, and we have to do this as a community, men and women, so that we both get the benefits from this. So that's kind of where I believe all of these stages that I've gone through, including the book, including the documentary, have led me to the Healing Heart Space Circle, which is the next phase of my journey.
You know, and I can bear witness to that in terms of how sometimes you're going along in life and you come to a sudden cross in the road.
Yeah.
Some people it's failed health, horrific life-changing accident.
Yes.
Many scenarios that allows you to stop in your tracks and take a different course of action, and then you realize that it needed to happen to bring you into your purpose. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the healing circles can be held at home.
Yeah.
I think we need to start having dialogue, mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives, brothers and brothers, sisters and sisters, to address the wrongs. They may be tiny, but because we have come through trauma, that trauma has built levels, and we're imploding one to the other. And I think it's that time now and we know what's happening on the planet spiritually,
Yeah.
that we as a nation start to take account of our own actions and heal the heart vibration. Because essentially it's the heart
It's the highest,
that is the epicenter of man, and and it raises the highest, vibration.
Yeah.
Sorry? It's the engine
Yes.
room. It's not the mind.
No.
It's the heart. And, you know, the ancients knew it. The ancient Egyptians, at the point of death, they would weigh the heart against a feather. Right? Because the heart needed to be light as the feather, meaning no remorse,
Yeah.
no bad vibes when you're going through.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Clean and clear.
Clean and clear. So, and that's, you know, Abi, I thank you so much for your journey.
Thank you.
The information about how we can get hold of you will be at the, you know, broadcasted at the end of the podcast and all the way through the visual podcast.
Yeah.
In fact, this is a practical question.
Yeah.
Are you set up to facilitate or accommodate private or national health systems? I say private because this broadcast will go out across the world and in the US.
Yeah.
And how do we reach you? How does individuals reach you? And how can they get access to the work that you do and be able to implement the work that you do?
Okay.
So you are a professional healer. You're a healer. This is what you do.
Yeah.
Having
yeah,
come through your
absolutely.
own journey.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Thank you, CJ, for asking. So my website,
Which will be on the screen.
yeah. is www.abiosho.com. So nice and simple. You can reach me through there. I'm on Instagram, Abi_soulmelanin. So the other part of my business, let's say, which is where I go to Africa, different parts of Africa. These are places that I've never been to before. I just want to make this clear. This is spirit taking me to these places. So I'll just give a little snippet. The first place I went to in lockdown, when people were being told that they could not travel.
People were traveling. I know this.
People were
Who
absolutely
totally traveling. We know this.
You know,
Yeah.
and I wanted to source indigenous oils in Ghana. And so I went to Accra, and I was told when I got there, you know, Madame, we can give you herbs, we can give you seeds, but there are no oils. And I knew in my heart that there were oils. I knew there were oils.
Yeah.
And so there were oils, but they were 13 hours away from where I was in the Bolgatanga region up by Burkina Faso. And so I knew one person who I stayed with. She stayed for 3 days and then she had to travel to France. But I met a herbalist, this incredible herbalist, who would tell me all about the plants, and he would tell me about the baobab tree and the way that it was just incredible. And so I found all these oils: baobab oil, hibiscus oil, papaya oil, neem oil.
Neem is very powerful.
Oh my days, all of them, you know, hemp oil,
real
lemongrass,
hemp oil.
the real hemp,
Yeah.
the real hemp oil, yeah, lemongrass essential oil. And so, but it was the Ghanaian lemongrass essential oil, because it's about the soil composition, as you know, is very different
Yes, we
to
talk
the
about-
Asian.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
so I'm
yeah.
going off piece to bit, but it's important because this is also part of my spiritual work. And the messages that I was getting from this was, when you bring these oils back, because I wanted to go, I wanted to meet, I need to know the energy of the people that are harvesting these. These are the messages that I wanted to share with my community, in that these indigenous oils, these oils that we've been using for generations and generations for our own health, are in our DNA. We just have to get reconnected back to what we've always had. It's a remembering. And so that started off my Soul Melanin business of holistic health. And then I went to Namibia and I ended up staying in Windhoek, and they were like, no, you've got to travel 10 hours to get to where the Namibian myrrh, which is the only place you can get it in the world. It's called Comifora wildi.
As in frankincense and myrrh.
As in frankincense and myrrh. And it was up in Apuwu, which is the northern region of Namibia. So long story short, I've got a little YouTube clip of this. I went to meet the Himba people. And the Himba people are a semi-nomadic people. So 10 hours we travelled.
Considered to be one of the lost tribes.
Absolutely. And incredible people.
Yeah.
We travelled in the bush and I went and I spent some time. I found the person, Ramivu Kavi, who actually was, went to America for a couple of years and he came back and he decided that he wanted to make a living museum for his people so they could generate an income, share how they lived, so that people around the world knew the power within these people. And so they showed me, because of where they are and it's so hot in this part of Namibia, so there's no water to bathe, all the rivers and the lakes are dry. So they steam clean. They use the red ochre from a layer under the earth and then they mix it with the Namibian myrrh. But here's what they call the Namibian myrrh, and this is when it was like heart for me.
Yeah.
They call it omumbiri, which means remember who you are.
And is that ingested or you rub? Is it topical?
It's topical. I'm always very careful of what I
you
say,
put
to the masses. So I would always say it's incredible. They use it for female, girls' initiation. They use it for spiritual, harmonious ceremony, cleansing. It's a very, very powerful oil. And so I always say to people, rub it topically on the heart. You can rub it topically around the stomach. Always do a patch test. You may want to use another oil, a carrier oil, to mix with it. I always say use an African carrier oil because you're getting the power and the vibration of the frequency.
And authenticity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is it so? So can you use these oils in our current locations around the world? Is atmosphere conducive to the power of the oil?
Absolutely.
Or it's not, doesn't matter as long as you're in the right vibration?
It's really, I believe it's about frequency and vibration.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So if you're, frankincense and myrrh have a very high vibration.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when people are vibrating at a low energy level, just breathing it in, rubbing it under the soles of the feet where you've got all of the reflex points of the bodies, gets it within the bloodstream within 20 seconds.
I want to say, though, to the audience that I don't think these are rubbing powerful oils into your body won't be the kind of the be all of your healing. This starts first and foremost with what we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
The forgiveness.
Absolutely.
The cleansing of the heart.
Yeah.
The self-analysis, the introspection.
Yeah.
Then it's a process. Because you talked about when you started writing the book, you thought you'd healed, and then there was some triggers.
Absolutely.
And you didn't know all that emotion. I've experienced this going on.
It's still being held all these years
and
later.
And women, we hold that in our middle section.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
All these, and so
yeah,
we have to go through this journey first. You've got to lance the boil, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's imperative that we start at this point, because what will happen, the planet's going through ecological shifts, and some of us are checking out. And I actually want to dedicate this program to our brother Benjamin Zephaniah.
Yeah.
That powerful poet.
Ashe.
Who just transitioned. But some souls have done their work and they're moving on.
Absolutely.
And others are too heavy to go into the next epoch. And you don't want to be left out by being too heavy, unforgiving, and a carry malice. So I just wanted to say that, right? Cleanse the heart.
Cleanse the heart. And all of these things that we're speaking about, myself, UCJ, Professor Femi, it's all part of our healing journey. But people will find different facets at different times for them to plug back into.
Yes, absolutely. Because we're here, we're all created equally, because we have the same, we have we have ears,
we have the same
five senses, essentially.
Mostly.
But we are arriving at our journey at different levels. It's not where you start, it's where you finish. But the important thing is that you have to start, because if you keep on doing what you do, you get the same results. You can't expect change. I wanted to ask you whether you say that your work is specifically for brown and black people, and I understand the trauma that we've all faced. Is there, how can I put this? and I was talking to my children about this the other day, that or maybe it was you, Professor Femi, when we talked about sitting in this space of comfort under the guise of white privilege. And we know that from a spiritual perspective, there is no color in the realm. But unfortunately, we're living on the earth, and someone set up a system of color and of oppressed people based on their skin color or their ethnicity or their background, etc. But is there a learning in here for those who sit in the fabled position of power, so-called? Is there a learning? Is there something we can teach?
And when you say that, are you talking just from like a general perspective or from the perspective of this book?
From a general perspective or from the perspective of the book? Because I don't know, I know your foster mother passed on, but are any of the, do you know if the book has been read by any of the families? Because some of those families still have siblings or parents still
Absolutely.
alive.
So for my foster family,
Yeah.
which most have passed on, but there's one still living.
Yeah.
No. But for other foster families,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had emails from foster carers who fostered Nigerian at the time who was
Yeah.
small,
Yeah.
who have just said, they just had no idea of the impact that this would have had on those children, on the children.
But some of that impact was being perpetrated by the foster parents themselves. Is there like a period of atonement? Have any of them atoned for some of the abuse that they inflicted?
CJ, once they realize, then that atonement question becomes relevant. Otherwise, they were just doing what they knew.
They
They were
don't
just
realise.
behaving the way they knew how to behave. Do you know what I'm saying? And they
at
were
that time.
doing to our children what they were doing because that's all they knew. Unless
Yeah.
they were going out of their way to be just evil, wicked, indecent people. But I'm sure, Abby can speak to that. But otherwise, they were doing what they knew. And what they knew was not good for us or our children.
And that is my point about wickedness not operating in right action.
Yeah.
Because all of this work speaks to that and and how it impacts the receiver. And so I suppose the question I'm asking is, using this work as a platform and a demonstration to those who are not in right action and have been responsible for the impact or the destruction of a people or persons. So some lessons in here that we want to get out to the wider, to the world impact.
To the wider world.
To the wider world.
Absolutely.
And there are stories, it's not just your story, there are stories around, we're in the advent of social media.
Many.
Where we can use other people's pain to do right in our own lives.
Yeah.
To atone.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no place for hate. Because if the heart is in its right vibration, it will always operate in love.
Always. Yeah.
Always. But there's much to be learned also from observing as people heal, right? So there's an observation that is going to take place, and that those who have, we have survived the ravages of oppression and continue to survive the ravages of oppression. It hasn't gone away, right? It hasn't stopped. It may be hiding in plain sight in many instances, but it's right here with us. So I think our specific responsibility and duty is to ourselves and those who look like us. We have a work to do that is extremely serious. It's deep and it's much. So I think from a place of observation, there will be learning on the part of those who are willing to learn, who are willing to atone, and who are willing to do that which is right. And there are always people who are willing to do that, But in the meantime, as you say, we need to use every means that we have available to us to tell our truth, to tell our stories. It's all part of our healing process. But the work, we have to do that. And we have to stay focused on it. We have to stay focused on making those connections that we need to make with our blood and non-blood family members,
Yeah.
across the board. But that's something that the focus has got to be an internal focus, as far as I'm concerned, with respect to the healing process and how we go about that and save ourselves, save our children, save our collective, save our nation, and also recognizing that there are those in our midst who will never get to this place of
Absolutely.
recognizing that there's a healing that needs to occur, that we're living in a spiritual space, and that much of what's going on is by design. This is not just something happening in a haphazard kind of way, right?
And in the realms of reincarnation, they will have to come back. I do not want to come back
Right.
after this journey.
Well,
Right.
absolutely.
Right.
This
And
fun.
that's a conversation
Not
for another
coming
day, right?
Yeah.
I want to ascend into the realms of an ancestor.
Right. I mean, I'm
I
at a
don't.
stage I'm at a stage now in my life, after 40 years in the business of educating people and just experiencing people in different parts of the world and in different hemispheres, where I could literally look at people and look at situations and say, okay, so that's where you're vibrating right now. I need to keep moving. I don't engage people when I know and I understand what the likely result is going to be.
Yeah.
Just based on my life experience, and will always be willing to open and to share with people who are in a space where there is a need for information, there's a need for understanding, there's a need for empathy, there's a need for the being embraced and so on. So the work that you do makes sense and is of benefit to people. Outside of that, it is mayhem, as you know.
As we round up, and I'm going to end with Abi, but I'm going to ask you the
Mm-hmm.
question, Professor Femi. What would you say to your family right now? We all have conflict within our families. It's just the way we're made up, right? When I say conflict, it could be a disagreement here, but if you're a family that's probably torn by stuff that's happened and you can't forgive one another, it might be your family, it might be a family of friends that you know, what would you say to them right now, having had this conversation? Not that this, I mean, you're an enlightened person, but what would you say to the diaspora?
To the diaspora versus my immediate family, because my immediate family, I'm doing the work every day. But I have children, some of whom were born in England, some of whom were born here, and a couple in the Caribbean. That's how broad my life goes, and they're up and down, and they're influenced by everything around them, and so on and so forth. And I connect with them when they're at a place where they're feeling things and not understanding. And not knowing what to do with what they're feeling or what they're experiencing. But I know what's going on because of how they were raised, right? So I have to take all of what they're feeling and utilize it. But what I would say to the diaspora and to our extended family, it is to recognize that we want to raise our vibration. We want to raise the level at which we exist on the planet. And we want to focus our energy in a spiritual space. I do not mean a religious space. I mean a spiritual space. Know that when we get those signs as we move through life, we're able to recognize what those signs are in relationship to our lives and what we're doing in our lives. I mean, many of us pray, for example, and when most of us pray, we're praying and asking for things and asking for stuff. Well, if you're living that spiritual life and that spiritual existence, when those things appear, you will know. You will be able to embrace those things. You'll be able to move forward in and with some level of faith. And if you understand that your ancestors are connected to you in an epigenetic way, you will absolutely be connected back to them and give them honor and pay them homage and pay them the homage before you pay it to Christ. as it has been sold
Who you
to
never
us,
saw. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? As it has been sold to us, so that you get reconnected to your lineage in a way that provides the kind of guidance. And this has been my life experience that you need to keep moving forward, putting one foot in front of the other every day, and understanding and knowing that this is going to be fine. You are going to be fine. Your collective is going to be fine. And these everyday occurrences, which is lifing, right? Lifing. You have to recognize it as that. Life is lifing. Outside that, focus on the spiritual. Raise your vibration. Sometimes it's desirous that we lean into things that will create an explosion. We should try to lean in, or should I say try to lean out as opposed to leaning in, when we recognize that people are vibrating at a very low level. Lean out. It requires discipline, because much of our ego is wrapped up in our interactions, right? And so we're driven by our ego. So we tend not to want to be disciplined enough to say, I need to walk away. So I need to back up, step left, and walk. So what you're doing is you're demonstrating to the person and persons that it is not always useful to simply just make a noise for the sake of making a point.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay?
And
offer love to people, always. That works. It's worked in my life.
thank you. And Abi, thank you so much. Thank you both for joining us on this really powerful topic, and for bringing your book, Becoming Visible to the World. Final 3 minutes. What would you like to say?
I believe that all of us that are here on this planet, in some way, shape or form, are on some form of healing journey. And what I know to be true for myself now is that when I'm engaging with people, when I'm listening to people, when people want to share their stories, I'm asking myself now, is my heart open or is my heart closed?
I like that.
And when my heart is open, I'm opening to listening to them sharing certain parts of their story with me. When my heart's closed, I'm telling myself I've only got 3 minutes here, and I'm not really listening or engaging to that individual.
Sorry to put a time constraint on it.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's life, right? I suppose. Yes.
It is life, but it's also teaching me and others, is my heart open, is my heart closed? And I think in terms of forgiveness and empathy and compassion, the times to show the forgiveness, the empathy and compassion is not when we're having these kind of easy, what I call easy conversations, because we love what we're talking about. It's when that individual in front of you, you know, has got something that they want to get, but they go into a defense mechanism because that's what's protected them.
Yes.
And it's about having the heart open and allowing them to see that you're there, being empathetic with compassion, allowing them to feel safe and protected when they speak to you about what's going on. And the natural defense many times is when somebody gets defensive is that I would shut down. Well, if you're going to speak to me like that, then I'm going to shut down. But that's been their safety and defense mechanism for many years. So when you can stand there with your heart open and hear them and say nothing, but just stand there making the eye contact until such a time when they say, I'm going to share something with you that I've never shared with anybody. And there comes the share, and sometimes there comes the tears, because it's been hidden for so long. And I say, you know, in my life, I'm healing every day. You know, it's not something that just happens, it's an everyday effort. But within that, I will always say to people that I come in contact with, if you can make a 1% shift every day on your healing journey, no matter how small that is, a 1% shift towards you becoming the highest version of yourself, know that it's not a matter of time. It's just knowing that you're going to get to a vibrational state where you become a match for who you're becoming as the highest version of yourself. So it's small and steady. A bit like Professor Femi was saying, it's about the discipline, but it's also about the consistency. And if you drop off, that's absolutely fine. Get
Dust
back
yourself
on
up and start all
and
over
start
again.
over again with your 1%.
Yes.
And make it manageable for you to ensure that you can be the highest vibration of yourself. So when people come into my space or your space, CJ, or Professor Femi's space, they feel the frequency. They feel it.
Power, absolutely.
And they will either move towards it because they want to be part of that. And we protect ourselves in that space of power.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes people will want to take
drain
that
that
from you
energy.
and drain that.
Yes.
Yeah. Or they'll move away because the frequency is too high for where they are right now.
Abi Osho,
Yeah.
my sister, thank you. And Professor Femi Bogolasagai, thank you. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Thank you,
Thank
Abby.
you very much.
Thank you, Professor
Bye.
Femi. And to you, CJ. It's been
Thank
incredible.
you. Great, thank you.
Greetings to you, Abi Osho here, coach, speaker, healer, and retreat creator. And I'm excited to be inviting you to our 4-month Healing Hearts Circle Facilitation Program. This is a program that was created for us, by us. And the reason why is because ancestrally, this is in our lineage. When we spoke, when we communicated, when we initiated, all of this was done in circle, in ceremony, in circle, where we hold that circular frequency and energy. And there are so many of us that need and want to be healed from something across the world. This is the most incredible way to do it. So this 4-month program has 5 pillars that talk about the journey, the vision, the identity, and how to take healing hearts from a format into a reality. The program starts at 7 p.m. on the 21st of February, GMT time. And I just want us to remember that we are the modern day griots. We are the storytellers. We are the ones that get to share our powerful stories, which help heal one another across the world. So I would love if you're feeling the pull to join me on February the 21st, 7 p.m. GMT time. Stay blessed.